Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Modern Customer Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Morgan. Do you ever think about the contact center and how the people that work in the contact center have such tough jobs? This is something I think about a lot. I also think about the managers that are in charge of the contact center staff and just what a tough job that is and how vulnerable the people in these positions must feel when they're dealing with customer problems all day long. Today, we have a vulnerability expert on the show, and it's my own husband, Jacob Morgan. Jacob is the best selling author of 5 books, including his most recent, Leading with Vulnerability: Unlock Your Greatest Superpower to Transform Yourself, Your Team, and Your Organization. He's also a speaker and professionally trained futurist. His work has been endorsed by the CEOs of Best Buy, Unilever, MasterCard, Audi, Ritz-Carlton, Nestle, KPMG, and more. Jacob is the father of my 2 children, my 3-year-old Noah and my 7-year-old Naomi. He's also been an incredible husband and partner and coach to me. And I'm so excited for his new book where we talk about something that we often don't talk about at work, which is feeling vulnerable, but leading with vulnerability. Welcome, Jacob Morgan. Jacob, welcome. Thank you for being on my show today.
Thank you for having me.
Usually I ask guests where they're calling in from. However, you're sitting right next to me, so I don't need to ask you.
Calling in from Los Angeles.
All right. So when I met you, you were already doing the writing and the speaking, and you started on customer relationship management. That's how I met you. For those who don't know, I met Jacob at a conference on customer experience, which I'm still doing. But Jacob took a more circuitous route, going from CRM to human resources to the future of work to leadership, and now leading with vulnerability, which is your new book. I'm so excited for you and so proud of you. Why did you write this book now? What was the inspiration?
Oh, man. Well, first, you should hold up the book because Blake actually designed a lot of the cover and a lot of the ideas for the book as far as the visual. Look at that.
It's a mountain.
Yes.
For those of you who are listening and not on YouTube, yes, it's a person at the bottom of a mountain.
They have a heart backpack and they're getting ready to climb this mountain. And I was brainstorming a long time. We went through probably 100 different book covers. And so Blake helped me come up with the idea for the cover. So thank you.
You're welcome.
So as far as why now? Probably because, I think a few things. When I wrote my last book, The Future Leader, a lot of people I interviewed a lot of CEOs for that, and the conversations around emotional intelligence and vulnerability came up. But at the same time, a lot of the CEOs that I was interviewing were telling me that they understood the power of vulnerability, but they didn't really understand how to make it work inside of their organizations because on the one hand, their employees wanted them to be strong and confident and competent. And then on the other hand, their employees were saying, well, we also want you to talk about your feelings and your emotions and challenges and struggles. A lot of leaders were trying to figure out, which one am I supposed to be? Am I supposed to be this vulnerable person who talks about my emotions and feelings? Or do you want me to be this strong, competent, visionary leader? So that was one challenge. And then a lot of leaders were also telling me that vulnerability in your personal life is not the same as it is at work, because in your personal life, it's very clear why to be vulnerable. It's important for relationships, for our relationship, for your spouse, your significant other, your friends, your family. But inside of an organization, it's not that easy because you have a hierarchy, you have a boss, you have employees, you have projects and deadlines, and you have money. So you can't just show up to work, talk about your feelings, your emotions, your challenges, and your mistakes and expect to get the same results. So that was a big, kind of a big driving force for the idea for the book. And I think another one, as you know, is my family.
Well, your family is now my family.
Yeah,
but it is your family.
Yes. So our family, on my parents' side, they came from the Republic of Georgia. My mom always tried to model the emotional vulnerability side, as you know, and my dad is the exact opposite. In fact, even I dropped off the kids this morning and my dad was like, remember you came to our house last week and we had this little fitness competition. He's like, you cheated. Let's do it again today.
Oh, he said that today.
Yes. So
Wow.
my dad he doesn't believe in vulnerability of any kind or of sharing your feelings, your challenges.
He's very private.
Yeah, very private.
Very.
Doesn't believe in talking about any of that sort of stuff. You always got to be physically number one, mentally number one. And even to this day, whenever I go over there, he's always, how many push-ups can you do? How many pull-ups can you do?
If you ask him a personal question, he'll find a way to completely not address it. Like even about this book, when I asked him, David, this book is about you. Like, what do you think of it?
Well, it's not really about him, but he's in it.
And like his ability to just step over my question was amazing.
Yeah, he's very good at that. He doesn't like to share stuff. And so I grew up never believing in vulnerability or being vulnerable. And then the story that I talk about in the book, I had a panic attack, and it became very clear that a lot of the panic attacks I was having were because I actually committed to writing a book about vulnerability.
And you were getting really stressed about your deadline.
Yes, I was getting stressed about the deadline, stressed about writing the
Family was
book. Yeah, family was here. So it was a lot going on. So
Do you want to talk about the panic attack? Since I was there with you?
What do you want to know? What do you want me to share about it?
I mean, what happened in that moment? What happened to you?
So I was in the...
Well, let me tell the audience what happened.
Okay.
Like from my...
All right, you tell it.
No, so I think it was in the morning, and all of a sudden, over the holiday period, it was like maybe a week before New Year's, or it was around there. You were, Blake, something's wrong. So I run into the bedroom, and you're laying on the bed. And then you just start telling me that you're having a panic attack.
No, I didn't tell you I was having a panic attack.
Or
I didn't know what it was.
Oh, okay.
I thought I was having a heart attack and I was going to die. And so nobody knew what was going on with me. But my heart started beating really quick and my vision became blurry and I was overcome with this fear of panic and dread. And so I wasn't sure what was going on. So it feels like I haven't had a heart attack, but from what I'm told, a panic attack and a heart attack feel very much the same. It's just that a panic attack is all mental and a heart attack is very much physical. So,
okay, so you're really dizzy, you're really scared, you really don't know what's going on, but you know you don't feel right, and it's mental and physical.
yes.
And then, honestly, I can't remember the timeline of what happened that day. When did we get in the car to go to the emergency room? Was it right after?
No, I think it was a week later because I first tried to get an appointment to go see a doctor. We weren't able to do that. We went to urgent care. They were filled with COVID patients. So
This was a week after the first
maybe
one?
not a week. No, probably a few days or 2-3 days probably.
Okay. Yeah, so we're sitting in the parking lot of one of these urgent cares, not like a real hospital, and they turn Jacob away. Okay, so we're sitting in the parking lot of the ER, and I'm begging you not to go in because I know the time, the stress, and the money that it will cost for this thing that I know is stress related. Because my dad's a psychiatrist, I also know a lot of physical things are often linked back to stress in the brain. So you finally told me, you went in, I think you learned the wait time and what it would take to get into the ER. And so you decided you would come home with me.
Yeah, and then I don't remember what happened directly after that. I think I had maybe a few more panic attacks. But then finally I got a chance to go see a therapist, talk to a therapist, and that was helpful.
My husband's very sweet, and it's initially why I fell in love with about him, that he's just very loving, very sweet, very emotionally intelligent, not like a typical macho angry guy, also very strong. So strong, but also not like a screamer or anything, just like very gentle person, very funny, sweet, and loving. But you are feeling, you don't really show weakness is the point that I'm trying to convey ever.
That is true.
And you don't like weakness.
I do not.
And you don't like weakness in
like
and
my
me
dad.
either. Sometimes you get frustrated because I'm very sensitive, so what did you learn from this journey that you went on from having a panic attack to doing therapy, which I think you never thought you would do?
No, I thought that was crazy, but I did do it, and it was helpful. Probably the most important thing was just learning how to talk about emotions and feelings in the right way, how to identify them, like the little things that we do now where we talk about how we're feeling at night has been very helpful. So those types of things have been really good, and just being more aware of how I'm feeling and why I'm feeling and what's causing me to feel certain ways. That's been, I think, very important.
So you get this insight into your own yourself, and it's mental, it's physical, but do you feel like now going through that you understand vulnerability better?
A little bit. I'm not like a expert, but definitely yes.
So part of this journey for you was also just going and doing all these interviews. How many interviews did you do for your book?
It was 100 CEO interviews and a survey of 14,000 employees.
So were they like open and willing to talk about this stuff that most people just wouldn't want to open up about?
I think some of them were, not all of them. I mean, some CEOs shared that they had panic attacks. They went through a lot of tough times. But then some CEOs I talked to, and they weren't as open. I mean, they still shared some stories, but different levels of openness depending on who I talk to.
So why is this valuable? Like, why should people be interested in exploring vulnerability at work? What's the purpose?
Well, the argument I make is you shouldn't be vulnerable at work. You should lead with vulnerability. And so the big difference there is vulnerabilities, for example, saying, hey, I'm really sorry I made a mistake at work, versus leading with vulnerability, which is, hey, I made a mistake at work, but here's what I learned and here's what I'm going to do in the future to make sure that the mistake doesn't happen again. So leading with vulnerability is about connection and competence, whereas traditional vulnerability is just, putting yourself out there and making yourself emotionally vulnerable. And I don't advocate actually for that inside of an organization unless you're adding the leadership and the competence piece to it, which I think is also very important.
So one of the things you do in the book is you have these different heroes. Do you know them well enough to talk about them? I know one of them you really kept wanting me to pin. You wanted to pin me on. You kept saying, "This is you, Blake. This is you."
Yeah, I think I remember the 5 superheroes. There's Captain Heart, which wears their heart on their sleeve. There's Wonder Worker, which is comfortable about vulnerability in a work but from a work standpoint, mainly talking about mistakes and things like that at work. There's Professor Personal, which is more comfortable with the personal side of vulnerability outside of work. Then there's Balanced Beast, which is somebody who is, I'd say, pretty even keeled across the board. So I'm more that superhero where it doesn't matter who I'm talking to. I have like the same level of the vulnerability with everybody. And
you
then
might never get to know him.
And then the last one is super situational, which is somebody who adapts and changes depending on who they're talking to and what the context is and what the situation is.
All right. So the reason I wanted you to come on the show, Jacob, is the contact center, which a lot of my listeners and viewers work in and run, is a place where it's very stressful.
Yeah.
I could imagine, couldn't you imagine working in a call center every day and just going home and wanting to have a panic attack because
I did that. I did telemarketing.
Yeah, and all these customers are contacting you, and most of them don't even have the tools to help anybody.
Yeah.
So they're just incurring all this negativity all day. It's very stressful. The managers aren't always equipped to help these and support these employees emotionally. And as a result, churn in the contact center is 45%. Basically, almost half of employees just get out of there as soon as they can.
That's pretty high.
So what do you think our contact center leaders that are watching, what lessons do you have for them, leaders that are managing groups in high stakes situations where they have to be fresh and they have to figure out a way to keep showing up even though customers are yelling at them and it's tough?
I don't think what the seniority that you have or the role that you're in doesn't really matter. I think in any situation where you're going to be vulnerable with team members and coworkers at work, you shouldn't do that unless you can sprinkle leadership into it. So if you're a contact center leader and you're telling people that, I don't know, you're making mistakes or you're burned out or you're tired all the time.
If you're the manager doing that.
Yeah, if you're the manager, I think part of the issue should be, also work on solving your own problem, right? Add the leadership piece to it. Don't just point out the problems, but try to come up with ways to solve them. Don't just talk about all your problems and challenges and mistakes and failures, but talk about what you're going to do to fix them. Talk about what you learned from them. So sprinkling that leadership piece, I think, is always important, and it's one that we forget.
I actually interviewed a contact center manager at Warby Parker the other day, and he had some interesting ideas. Would you be willing to listen to what he told me, which I think you would like? Because he actually just sounds like an amazing manager, Jacob, that maybe like you or I could have had when we were younger. One of the things he does, when he gives contact center agents feedback, he doesn't bring them into his office because he doesn't want them to feel like, oh, I'm going to the principal's office. And he actually wants to catch them when he's delivering negative feedback. like out. He takes them to lunch, or he does it like in their cubicle so they feel comfortable. I really never thought of that. Like even just when you give feedback to a person, like thinking how can I get them comfortable so they can receive this, not feel attacked and put their guard up. What do you think of that tip?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Do things in people's comfort zone and in their environment. So yeah, I think it's actually a good idea.
One of the other things he does is he changes roles with the agent. The agent becomes the manager and he becomes the agent. So they get
Like role play?
no, like they get to look at all the reports, they get to be in big meetings, and he has to do their job. And he does a lot like that, like
That's a good like empathy. Um,
empathy training.
yeah,
Yeah.
put yourself in someone else's shoes. Literally, do their job. I like that.
Let's get back to your book. I know a lot of the stories in your book because I read your book. But is there like one favorite CEO or leader that you really like their story? I mean, I can even remember.
Well, which one do you remember?
How about the story about the airline CEO? Is it Continental?
Yes, that's in this book. And so it's a story that the CEO of American Airlines shared with me, Doug Parker. He's since retired. But it was the CEO of Hollis Harris, who used to be the CEO of Continental Airlines, which was a struggling airline. And then in the 90s, Hollis Harris was asked to write a memo to his entire workforce, basically talking about what's going on. And so he sends a memo out to his, I think it was like 40,000 employees. And he talks about the challenges in the business, the challenges in the economy. And he doesn't address that he has a way out or that he has any solutions. And then he ends his memo by basically saying, pray for the future of the company. Well, it's a very vulnerable thing to say. And the next day he got fired. And as Doug Parker from American Airlines reminded me, he said what Hollis Harris did was vulnerable, but there was no leadership. Because if Hollis Harris was a junior employee in accounting and he did that, nobody would care. They'd say, oh, you're having a bad day, let's go out to lunch, and everything would have been fine. But when you're in a leadership role and you're just vulnerable without that leadership piece, it causes a lot of problems. And there were a lot of CEOs that I interviewed during the pandemic that were in similar spots. And I don't know if you remember the story of Fleetwood Grobler from the book. Do you remember him?
What's the kind of company is it?
Sasol, so South African energy company. And this guy was also in a similar spot like Hollis Harris, where the company was in debt. It was about to get repossessed by the banks. It was going through a really tough time. And he also had to give not a memo, but an all-hands meeting to his 30,000 employees. And his message also started off with vulnerability, where he talked about the difficult issues with the economy and the business, and he didn't know what path to take, which was vulnerable. But then he added the leadership stuff. And the leadership stuff was, I have a vision for how we can get out of this. I know that we have a talented group of people, a wonderful workforce. We could rebuild trust in the eyes of our employees and our customers. And if you go with me on this journey and help me figure out what to do, then I'm sure we can turn things around and be successful. And that's exactly what happened. So he had the vulnerability stuff that Hollis did, but he also added the leadership piece, which Hollis did not have. And I think that's a good example of what leading with vulnerability is instead of just being vulnerable.
Okay, so I like that story about the energy company. Let's switch gears to a related industry, waste management, and a young executive who uses vulnerability to create empathy. Can we talk about my favorite executive, Jim Fish?
Yeah, so Jim Fish, the CEO of Waste Management, he didn't really use vulnerability. He was just in a situation where he was vulnerable, and then he acknowledged it and let other people give him sympathy and condolences. So basically the story is he's in New York negotiating a big business deal with a lot of lawyers and business professionals that are in the meeting basically to rip his head off, like chop his company up for parts and negotiate everything that they can. His mom is very sick in Austin, and in the middle of all of this, his mom passes away. So he gets a call.
He's not with her, right?
He's not with her, no. So he's in New York, she's in Austin. He gets a phone call. He steps out of the meeting, and his twin sister basically says, mom passed away. So Jim Fish is very visibly upset and emotional, and he gets back into the meeting, and a lot of the other people in the room are looking at him, is everything okay? And he tells them what happened. and they ask him if he wants to proceed with the meeting, and he says, yes, it's fine, let's carry on. And so for the next 15, 20 minutes, everybody's talking about their families and what they learned from their parents, and it's kind of this emotional moment. And basically the point of everything is that the fact that Jim was receptive to other people's sympathy and receptive to their condolences put him in a vulnerable spot. And he didn't need to share any of that. He could have been kind of like a rock in that meeting, but because he opened himself up and allowed himself to take those things in, he got a phone call shortly after the deal was done from one of the managing partners. And he said, because you allowed and accepted that, it helped the deal go through easier. It helped us negotiate through some of the sticking points that we probably wouldn't have been able to get through. And so it's, I talk about the story much more in the book, but it helped kind of go through that process with everyone.
Yeah, so I've been using vulnerability a long time, and I feel like I've influenced you a little bit, because I always say that you don't need to hide if you're sensitive, that sometimes people, because what I've learned is no one likes somebody that's perfect, because it's not relatable.
Yeah, that's true.
But in business, there's this, I don't know if it's a trope, but this vision of this executive that's very like emotionless.
Yeah, the stereotypical leader. Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot going on in society right now. I feel like your book has never been more relevant. Leaders are not prepared. I've never heard the word mental health so much in the news.
It's a lot.
Ever. And so if there's one tip that you learned from this book, and just how to be a good manager, which I think is really hard.
Yeah.
I think you're actually a very good manager as well.
I try.
What would you say, one really, really hard-hitting tip from your book?
Well, the important thing is, and the whole premise of the book, which we kind of started off with, is don't just be vulnerable at work. Because you get hired for a job because you have a certain set of skills and capabilities and things that you could do. And so if somebody hires you, you take a job and then you just show up to work every day talking about your feelings and emotions and challenges and struggles and failures. At a certain point, the people who brought you in are going to say, what's going on here? Maybe you're not the right person for the job. And so the right approach is, if you're going to be vulnerable, is to add the leadership piece. And another analogy from the book is from the CEO of Smile Brands, Steve Bilt, who was also in my previous book. And he says, if you're in 6th grade and you keep showing up asking about 4th grade math, eventually your teacher and the students in there are going to say, this is 6th grade. Why are you asking about 4th grade math? But if instead you show up, you're asking questions about 4th grade math, but now you say, I have a tutor. I'm staying after school later to get help from the teacher. Instead of solving 5 homework problems every day, I'm going to do 10. Now you're closing the gap. And so really leading with vulnerability is, how do you create that connection with people, but also demonstrate that you're trying to close the gap that you might have? Mm-hmm. Learning, growing, developing, becoming more competent. And I think that's the best piece of advice. Leadership plus vulnerability equals leading with vulnerability.
I mean, we've been together 13 years. We've been married 9. We have a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old. I can't really think of a better anecdote than being a parent to being vulnerable, because having children makes you very vulnerable.
It does.
That's actually a quote from the show Billions. Surprise. But yeah, having children makes you vulnerable. Are there any parallels between being a good manager and being a good parent, or something you've learned about business from parenting, or vice versa?
Oh, man. Yeah, there are a lot of parallels. I think the emotion aspect is really important. Like even with our daughter, Naomi, I try to be more aware of her emotions. I think the leadership stuff is sometimes less relevant in the family stuff and more relevant at work. Sometimes, for example, with our daughter, I just try to be more vulnerable and have less of the leadership, like maybe a little bit of in there, but kind of more vulnerable, because if she gets upset about something, she really just wants to have that connection and to talk and to share. And she doesn't always want kind of the leadership, the strong, here's what I've learned. She just wants to have the feelings acknowledged and to kind of talk about it, because she's still learning how to express her feelings and her emotions. Whereas at work, if it's with an employee who makes a mistake or they do something wrong, then I'd say that the leadership stuff is much higher there. The competence, what did you learn? How are you going to move past this? not to say that that doesn't exist in parenting, but I think it exists far more in the workforce, because with parenting, sometimes you have to tone down the work hard in certain situations and really just focus on
Like the way you make Naomi feel. That she feels loved by you.
yeah, making
She
sure that
feels
she
seen by you.
feels loved and
Safe.
seen.
She feels safe.
Yeah, loved, seen, and safe. Not always like there's a lesson involved or I'm working on something. So I'm trying to be more conscientious about that. But yeah, there's a lot of parallels. I think whether it's at work or at home, the connection piece is always relevant. The leadership piece is always relevant. I just think it's different dials of how much of each is used, whether it's at work or at home.
Do you think writing this book and being interviewed about vulnerability and talking about vulnerability all the time, do you think it's changed you at all?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, not being interviewed about it and talking about it a lot. I think just the writing of the book has. But no, I mean, now that I'm maybe talking about it a lot is just making me think about it more and remembering more of the stories and the research and the data that after you write the book, maybe sometimes you forget. But yeah, I mean, hopefully it makes me lead with vulnerability more. I mean, that's the idea. I'm on the journey with everybody else.
Well, I think we should do some rapid fire questions to get to know you a little bit. I
All
can
right.
even guess the answers to the question. Well, I know some of the answers, but
Cheating.
all right. First question, what did you have for breakfast?
Oh, today was a protein shake.
What's the most important part of your morning?
Exercising.
What show are you watching right now or streaming?
Oh, you already know the answer to that one. We're watching Murders in the Building.
Only Murders.
Only Murders in the Building. And we're watching Newsroom. Is it called Newsroom?
It's called The Morning Show.
Oh, The Morning Show. Newsroom was a different show. Yeah, The Morning Show.
If you could have lunch with anyone.
And Saul, Better Call Saul.
If you could have lunch with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be?
Oh my goodness. Anybody dead or alive? Probably a chess player. I think it'd be fun to have lunch with Magnus Carlsen, who's a chess player now, or maybe Einstein or Thomas Edison or one of the great inventors. There's a lot of people.
All right. What is the greatest music or band of all time?
Greatest music or band of all time. I listen to a lot of house music when I'm working, so I listen to a lot of electronic music. I wouldn't say that those are amazing bands. As far as the best bands,
It's also childhood friendly, guys listening.
Yeah.
Electronic dance music doesn't have curse words.
yeah, no, I'd probably say best band, maybe like Led Zeppelin or The Doors or Deep Purple. I'm a big classic rock as far as music and musicians go.
Is there one person that influenced your life? I won't say a book. Usually I ask people a book or a leadership resource, but like somebody that just inspires you a lot, that does what we do potentially.
Just you, my love.
Okay, that's fine. What is your favorite type of vacation?
Probably, it depends on the mood. I have two types. Sometimes it's a fun exploring vacation, like going to a new city or a new part of the world, and sometimes it's just kind of lounging by a beach. So I've both.
And what is a motto that summarizes your outlook, like in a few words?
Probably what my dad always told me growing up. He always said, be a leader, not a follower. So I always try to do that.
All right. And how do you relax at the end of a hectic day?
Doing stuff related to chess, or we usually watch a show together in the evenings.
What is one mental health tool that you use when things get hectic?
Meditation, although I haven't done that in a while, but chess is kind of like my meditation. It takes my mind off of things. Probably exercising is a huge one.
Do you want to change the world with your book? Do you think it'll help people?
I hope so. We'll see. That's the
A
goal.
lot of people struggle with this vulnerability thing.
Yeah, especially in the workplace. So I hope it will. Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's very confusing. Like, how do you show up at work? I think that if I could rename your book, it would be like, how do you show up at work? But this is a great book. I'm really proud of you. Adam Grant endorsed it. It's on the cover. Adam Grant's quote. And I'm just really proud of you to go on this journey on this topic that is quite uncomfortable for many people.
It
and
is.
I think you're going to heal people with this book.
I hope so. It was a scary journey. You were very supportive. My wife is quoted a lot in the book, a lot of her sayings.
And
here
you
and there.
support me a lot. We've been through a lot together.
That's true.
Well, I am so excited for you. I think all of you contact center leaders and people that manage tough divisions like customer service would really benefit from Jacob's book, Leading with Vulnerability. Unlock your greatest superpower to transform yourself, your team, and your organization.
Yep.
Why don't you give everybody your website URL so they can go visit you and find where to buy the book?
Yeah, the book URL is leadwithvulnerability.com, and my URL, that's just for the book. My personal URL is thefutureorganization.com.
Can they Google Jacob Morgan?
They can. There are a lot of different Jacob Morgans out there, but make sure you find the right one.
Thefutureorganization.com.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for being on my show, sweetie. I'm really proud of you. I'm really happy for you. And I hope you enjoyed listening to Jacob. And for those of you on YouTube watching us, and we should do this again sometime soon. You're always welcome back.
Yay.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for watching and tuning into the Modern Customer Podcast.